picture a hotel. Now empty it of everything that makes a hotel a hotel. Remove the beds, remove the pillows, the sheets, the towels, the soap, the little wrapped biscuit they leave on the pillow. Remove the staff who smile at you. Remove the lock on the door. Remove the door. Remove the room itself. Now string a rope between two wooden posts at chest height. Charge a penny. Tell people to lean. That's where you're sleeping tonight. That's where thousands of people in Victorian London slept every night of their lives. Not because they were lazy, not because they were stupid, because a penny was all they had, and this was what a penny bought. Welcome to the twopenny rope. Welcome to the penny hang. Welcome to the lowest rung of shelter that still technically counts as shelter, where the only thing between you and the open street is a length of damp hemp cord and the questionable mercy of a man called the deputy who will cut that cord at 6 in the morning whether you're ready or not. The Victorian era. Roughly 1837 to 1901. 64 years of progress, of railways spreading across the country like veins, of gaslight turning city streets into something almost magical after dark, of the Great Exhibition of 1851, where 14,000 exhibitors from 32 countries came to show what humanity had built, of telegraph cables under the ocean connecting continents, of Darwin and Dickens and Brunel and Florence Nightingale, also of 7-year-olds working in coal mines, also of women dying in childbirth at rates that would make you weep, also of cholera killing tens of thousands in a single summer, because nobody had figured out yet that you shouldn't drink the same water you put your sewage in. Also of this, also of people sleeping on a rope. London in the 1880s has a population of about 5 million people, the largest city in the world, the capital of an empire that covers a quarter of the Earth's surface. You could walk the streets of London and hear a dozen languages in a single afternoon. You could eat food from India and China and the West Indies. You could buy a newspaper for a halfpenny and read about wars happening on 3 different continents. You could also, if you were poor enough, find yourself lying in a doorway in Whitechapel in November with nothing between you and the sky but a thin layer of freezing fog, listening to your own teeth chatter, watching a rat investigate your boot, wondering how it got to this. That's the city we're going into tonight, and I'll be honest with you, I make these history stories for sleep, and this one I genuinely don't know how you're going to sleep through it, because the more I researched it, the angrier I got. Not theatrical angry, genuinely, quietly furious in the way you get when you realise something was always true and you just didn't know it. But sleep to it if you can. Get comfortable in a way the people in this story never were. And listen. Here we go. The smell hits you first. It always does. Not the smell you expected. Not the romantic poverty smell of old novels. Not wood smoke and leather. This is something else entirely. Something that gets into the back of your throat and sits there like a fist. Wet wool first. Dozens of coats and jackets and shawls, all of them soaked through by the November rain that's been coming down since afternoon. All of them pressed close together in a space maybe 30 feet long and 15 wide. All of them steaming slightly in the warmth from the single iron stove in the corner. Wet wool smells like a sick dog. Wet wool smells like everything that's wrong. Underneath that, unwashed skin. Weeks of it, some of these people. Months. Not because they don't care, but because hot water costs money and privacy costs money, and somewhere to put your clean clothes while you wash costs money. And everything in this city costs money, always, constantly, in ways that grind you down to nothing if you let them. Then the stove itself, coal smoke caught at the back, because the flue's not drawing properly and hasn't been for 2 winters, but nobody's going to fix it. That smoke sits in the room like something alive, turning the single gas lamp into a yellowish smear of light that illuminates nothing properly but shows you everything you need to see. And underneath all of it, the smell of the rope. Hemp. Old hemp. Damp hemp. Hemp that's absorbed every body that's ever leaned against it over however many years this place has been running. It smells organic. Complicated. It smells like the last stop before the street. You're 23 years old. Your name is William Marsh. And 3 weeks ago you had a job, not a good job. Not a job that paid enough or treated you as anything other than a pair of hands attached to a body attached to a head that was expected to show no signs of having opinions. But a job, a room, a bed you didn't share with strangers, a bowl of something hot in the evening. Now you have the rope. You find a spot. There aren't many left by the time you've paid your penny to the deputy at the door, a squat man with a face like bread left out too long, who takes your coin without looking at you and jerks his head toward the room. The room is maybe 2/3 full. 20, 25 people. Men, mostly. A few women at the far end clustered together in a way that suggests this isn't their first night here, that they've learned something about where to position themselves and who to keep close. The rope runs the length of the room, one long rope, looped and knotted around wooden posts waist high, with a second rope parallel to it about 2 feet forward for your arms. You find a gap between a young man who might be 15 and is already asleep, and an older man in a coat that was once quite good and still retains, in the particular drape of it, the memory of having been better. You lean. This is it. This is what you've paid a penny for. Not a seat, not a bed, not a mat on the floor. Just this. The rope catching you under the armpits when your legs give out. Your body forming a shape that isn't quite standing, and isn't quite sitting, and isn't quite lying, and is none of the things a body was designed to do for 8 hours, but is the closest thing to rest you're going to get tonight. The wood of the post is rough under your right hand where you're gripping it. Splinters have been worn smooth by other hands, other nights, but the grain of the wood is still there, raised slightly, catching against your palm. Your left hand hangs loose. You've learned already in the 3 weeks of this to relax the left side entirely and let the rope take the weight, and to grip with the right only when you start to tip, which happens every 20 minutes or so when you drift far enough towards sleep that your muscles stop holding your spine upright. The room fills up. By 9 o'clock there's barely room to shift your weight. The man to your left smells of something sweet and chemical that you eventually identify as the glue used in a shoe factory. The man to your right, the one with the coat, breathes through his nose with the deliberate steadiness of a person pretending to sleep before he actually does, which you recognize because you've done it yourself. The stove pops and clicks in the corner. Someone coughs. Someone else coughs. In a room like this, a cough is not just a cough. A cough is a statement of fact about the state of your lungs, and the state of most of these lungs is not good. The damp gets in. The coal smoke gets in. The winters in this city are not gentle, and the twopenny rope is not a gentle place, and the bodies in it show the evidence of that, in the set of shoulders and the depth of coughs, and the way people breathe even in sleep, carefully, as if air is something to be rationed. You think about Thomas Hewitt. That's the name of the man in the coat. You learned it last night, your second night here. He told it to you in the tone of someone who hasn't introduced himself to anyone in a long time, and has suddenly remembered that people do that. that it's a thing people do. He used to be a clerk. He said it simply, without the shame you might have expected, but also without the defensiveness, simply as a fact. He was a clerk in a shipping office near the river for 11 years. He knew the exact tonnage of 300 ships. He could convert any currency in the empire into sterling in his head. He could write a letter of correspondence that would satisfy both the company's directors and the foreign merchants they dealt with, which is harder than it sounds, he said, because they wanted different things from the same words. He lost the position when the company merged with another, and there were suddenly twice as many clerks and half as many positions, and he was 47 years old. And the new men running things preferred younger clerks who would work for less and hadn't spent 11 years developing opinions about how things ought to be done. That was 8 months ago. 8 months from a clerk's desk to the twopenny rope. 8 months. You think about that number. 8 months is not a long time. 8 months ago it was March. Snowdrops still in the parks. A different world. You need to stop thinking about Thomas, or you'll stay awake all night thinking about the arithmetic of failure. And you can't afford to stay awake, because tomorrow you have to be capable of finding work, which requires being capable of presenting yourself as someone who doesn't sleep on ropes, which requires sleeping on this rope as efficiently as possible. So, you close your eyes, the room breathes around you. Someone near the door is muttering something in his sleep. Not words exactly, more like the shape of words, the rhythm of a conversation happening in a place where the rules are different. His head is tilted forward, chin on chest, and the muttering comes and goes with his breathing, rising when he exhales and cutting off when he draws breath again. The stove is cooling. The deputy put coal in it at 8, and he won't put coal in it again until morning, and November in London is not the kind of November that waits politely for the stove to be refuelled. The cold comes in through the gaps in the walls, of which there are several. Comes in through the window at the far end, which has glass in it, but the glass has a crack someone has stuffed with a rag, and the rag does less than you'd hope. You feel the cold start at your feet and work upward. Your boots are the main thing standing between you and it. You bought them second-hand from a stall in Petticoat Lane, and they're good boots, solid leather, barely worn before whoever owned them before you decided to stop walking. You don't know why that person stopped walking. You don't ask those questions about second-hand things in this city, because the answers are usually either sad or frightening. Your toes are already cold. The soles of your boots are thin enough that you can feel the particular texture of the wooden floor through them, the grain and the slight give. The floor hasn't been swept tonight. You can feel grit under the leather, sawdust from whoever swept it last time, mixed with the dirt tracked in from the street, mixed with things you're not going to catalogue because some things you just have to not catalogue. The boy to your left makes a small sound and tips sideways, his shoulder hitting yours, and you feel his weight for a moment, surprising and warm, before he shifts and rights himself and settles back into whatever arrangement of bones and rope constitutes sleep for him. He can't be more than 15. He has the kind of face that was probably pleasant once before whatever happened to it. Not disfigured, just worn. The specific wearing that comes from being young in a place that does not particularly care if you're young or old or anything in between. You're not going to ask about him either. Not tonight. Tonight you're going to close your eyes and let the cold and the smell and the muttering man and the cooling stove and the weight of the rope under your arms all just become part of the air around you. Background noise, the texture of existence in this place and this time. And you're going to sleep. You're going to sleep. You're going to... The man with the cough coughs again. 3 in the morning is a particular kind of cold. Not the polite cold of early evening, not the sharp, aggressive cold of just before dawn. 3 in the morning cold is patient. It has been working on you since midnight, finding the gaps in your coat, discovering that your collar doesn't quite close at the back, noting that your right glove has a hole at the thumb. By 3 in the morning it has made itself at home. It's not an intruder anymore, it's a resident. Your back aches. This is the thing nobody tells you about the rope. It's not just uncomfortable in the way that sleeping upright is uncomfortable, in the way that a long journey on a hard seat is uncomfortable. It's something more specific than that. The rope catches you at the wrong point, just below the shoulder blades, and after 3 hours your spine has curved around it like a parenthesis, and every muscle from your shoulders to your hips has been recruited to compensate for this curve. And now those muscles are making their displeasure known in a way that is quite clear and quite continuous. You shift. The man in the coat shifts too, not a competitive shift, a cooperative one. He's been awake, you realise. He's been awake for a while. Can't do it, he says very quietly. Not to you specifically. More as a statement of general fact. No, you say. Younger than me, he says, nodding almost imperceptibly toward the sleeping boy. Doesn't seem to matter. His body just does it. Mine did that too, you say. When I was that age. A pause. First few nights here I could sleep anywhere. Now I can't. Your body learns, Thomas says. That's what it does. Learns what it needs to compensate for, and then it can't stop compensating. He's quiet for a moment. I used to have a mattress, he says. Horsehair, rather good one. Took me 4 years to buy it properly. Not from a moneylender, actual savings. 4 years. You don't ask what happened to the mattress. He tells you anyway. Sold it in May, along with most of the furniture, along with the books. There was a time I thought, surely the books will sustain me. Surely I can hold on to those. But then April becomes May, and you realise that what will actually sustain you is coin, and books are not coin, and so... He makes a small, precise gesture with one hand, a gesture that encompasses the room, the rope, the cold, the whole arithmetic of it. So, the word hangs in the air. You learn things quickly when you're here. You learn them the way you learn a language in a country where nobody speaks yours, by immersion, by necessity, by the particular education of having no alternative. You've been at the twopenny rope for 3 nights, and already you know things that would have seemed impossible from the other side of knowing them. You know that the rope system is not the bottom. People think it is. People who have never been near poverty think that sleeping on a rope is the absolute worst thing, the ultimate degradation, the floor below which there is nothing. They're wrong. Below the rope is the penny sit-up. The penny sit-up is exactly what it sounds like. You pay a penny. You sit. On a bench, usually. No rope, no leaning. You simply sit, upright, on a hard wooden bench in a room full of other sitting people, and you stay sitting until 6 in the morning when they push you out. No sleeping. You're not permitted to sleep. If your head drops, the deputy prods you with a stick. You sit awake through the whole night. People pay for this. Pay a penny to sit upright in the cold all night with someone prodding them if they close their eyes, because the penny sit-up is inside and a penny is what they have, and outside is November in London, and outside is the kind of place where a person can simply stop existing between one day and the next and nobody will know until someone trips over them. Below the penny sit-up is the doorway, the arch, the iron grating over a basement where warm air rises from the building's heating system, and if you find the right one and nobody's already there and the constable doesn't move you along, you can curl around it and take what the city gives. Below that is nothing. Below that is the river, and the river is not romantic, and the river does not care. Above the rope, though, above the rope is a whole hierarchy of possibilities, each one costing more and offering more, like a ladder where every rung is still precarious, but the ones further up are less immediately fatal. Above the rope is the fourpenny doss. For 4p you get a bed. A real bed. Well, a thing called a bed. A wooden frame with a canvas stretched across it, and a blanket of uncertain history, and a pillow that is technically a pillow in the same way that the rope is technically shelter. You share the room with anywhere between 6 and 20 other men. The rooms smell like all of them, all the time. There are bedbugs. There are always bedbugs. The bedbugs are not a variable. They are a constant. But it is a bed, lying down, horizontal, your spine in the configuration it was designed for. And for that, and for the particular relief of that, 4p feels like a very reasonable price if you have 4p, which 3 weeks ago you did and 2 weeks ago you did not. That's how it happened. The job first. Let's talk about the job. You came to London from Kent, a village called Harling, outside Faversham, which is the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and everyone has always known everyone, and the particular weight of being known everywhere all the time is something you don't even notice until you leave, and then you miss it violently, and then gradually you don't miss it at all. You came to London because your cousin Edward was here, working at a factory in Bethnal Green that made furniture. He wrote to say there was work. He wrote in a confident, large hand on good paper, not his, borrowed from the office where the factory owner kept his accounts, and the letter said, "Come, there is work. The work is hard, but the pay is regular, and London is London, and isn't that what you want? You were 19. Of course that's what you wanted. So you came. On the train from Faversham to London Bridge, and the train was the fastest thing you'd ever experienced, and you sat with your face nearly pressed to the glass, watching Kent become London. The fields giving way to suburbs, giving way to the dense, packed, irregular mass of the city. More buildings than you'd ever conceived of in one place. The railway cutting through the backs of houses close enough that you could have reached out and touched the washing strung between windows, and then London Bridge Station, and the sound of it, even before you got off the train, the sound of a place that never quite stopped. You found Edward. The factory was exactly as hard as he'd said, which is to say very hard, and the pay was exactly as regular as he'd said, which is to say weekly, and London was exactly as much as he'd said, which is to say everything. You worked in the factory for 3 years. You learned to work with wood, which you hadn't known before, and which turned out to be something your hands understood quickly. The grain of it, the weight of different species, the particular satisfaction of a joint done correctly. You weren't a craftsman. You were never going to be a craftsman. The factory didn't make craftsmen. The factory made furniture faster than craftsmen made furniture, which was the point, which was why the craftsmen who made furniture the old way were increasingly struggling to make furniture at all. You lived with Edward in 2 rooms in Bethnal Green. The rooms were small, the building was crowded. The landlady, Mrs. Perkins, collected the rent on Friday mornings and looked at you with an expression that suggested she didn't entirely trust that Friday morning would always produce the rent, but it always did. And over 3 years that expression softened slightly, which was about as warm as it was going to get. Then Edward got sick, fever first, then something the doctor called congestion of the lungs, which meant his breathing became a sound rather than a silence, a wet, laborious sound that you could hear through the wall at night, and that frightened you in a way that was partly concern for him and partly, shamefully, concern for yourself. Because if Edward died, then you were alone in a city of 5 million people, with no family and no savings to speak of, and a factory job that was yours only as long as you showed up for it. Edward didn't die, but he went back to Kent. His mother came for him in August, a small, fierce woman from Harling, who had the look of someone who'd been preparing for this exact emergency for years, and was not going to let London win, and she took him home on the train, and that was that. You didn't go home. You should have. Looking back, you can see the point at which you should have said, Edward's gone. The rooms cost more than I can manage alone. I'll go home and find something there. Instead, you stayed. Found cheaper rooms, further from the factory, more crowded, louder, smelling differently than the rooms with Edward, but not better. Saved what you could. Worked more hours. The factory closed in September. Not all of it. Part of it. The part you worked in. They were rationalising operations, the foreman said, using the word the way people use words that mean something bad when they want the word to sound like it means something practical and unavoidable. Rationalising. As if the alternative was irrational. As if keeping 30 men employed was somehow against reason. 15 men out. You were one of the 15. You had 3 weeks of rent paid. You had a little more than that in savings. Not much. A few shillings carefully accumulated over 3 years of careful accumulating. You started looking for work. This is the part that nobody who hasn't done it quite understands. Not the despair of it. Not the humiliation. Those things are real and they matter, but they're not the main thing. The main thing is the time. The extraordinary amount of time that looking for work in this city requires. You get up in the morning and you walk to the factory gates of every factory within walking distance, because walking distance is free and omnibus fare is not, and you stand with the other men and wait to see if the foreman comes out. Sometimes he does, sometimes he picks men. You watch faces around you as the picking happens. The way hope and its absence move across them. Sometimes you're picked, more often you're not. Sometimes you're given half a day's work and paid accordingly, and it's not nothing but it's not enough. Then you try the shops, the warehouses, the loading docks, the newspaper offices, anywhere that might need a pair of hands and be willing to pay for them. October passes this way. Your savings shrink with the days. The landlady's expression, which had softened slightly over 3 years, hardens again, harder than before, because a man looking for work is a different category of risk than a man with a job, and she has bills to pay like everyone else in this city. Bills that don't care whether her tenants are employed or not. You miss a week's rent at the end of October. The room is gone the following Monday. So there it is. 3 years in London, 3 years of regular work and careful saving, 3 years of learning this city and its rhythms, and the result is standing outside a terraced house in Bethnal Green, with your possessions in a bag that used to belong to your cousin, watching the door close on the room where you used to sleep, and having to decide what to do next. What you do next is the fourpenny doss. There are common lodging houses all over the East End. They're regulated now, technically. There was legislation in 1851 and again later, requiring registration and inspections and minimum space per person. The enforcement of this legislation is charitably inconsistent. The lodging houses are not clean, they are not pleasant, but they have beds. And for the first 2 weeks of November you sleep in beds, rotating between 3 or 4 houses depending on availability and your remaining funds. The fourpenny doss runs out when the funds run out. Then the rope. This is the calculation you've been making every night. This is the arithmetic that runs constantly in the background of everything else you think and do and see in this city. You have pennies. You have them, you spend them, you acquire them through whatever work you can find, and you spend them again. Some days you acquire more than you spend. Those are the good days. Some days you acquire none, and you spend two. One for the rope, and one for whatever food you can find that costs a penny. Bread, mostly. A cup of something hot from one of the street vendors, if you're lucky. 3 weeks of this, and you know the price of everything in a radius of 1/2 mile from where you sleep. You know which baker sells yesterday's bread at half price at closing time. You know which mission serves soup and how early you need to arrive to get near the front of the queue. You know which streets the constables patrol and at what times, and which doorways they check and which they don't. Not because you're planning to sleep in a doorway, but because you need to know everything about this train. The same way you need to know everything about any train you're trying to survive. The rope shifts slightly as the room settles. The stove has gone cold. Properly cold now, the last of the warmth absorbed into the walls and the ceiling and the packed bodies of the men sleeping around you, and now even that's running out, and the temperature in the room is equalized with the temperature outside, which is something just above freezing but not enough above it to make any real difference. The boy on your left is still sleeping. Impossibly still sleeping, his body contorted over the rope in a way that defies physiology, his head on his forearms, arms crossed over the rope, the whole structure of him arranged around this pivot point, this cheap penny-a-night fulcrum. Sleeping the way young people sleep in extremity, with complete commitment, the body taking what it needs regardless of circumstances. You envy him this. Thomas, on your right, is awake. You know because you can hear him breathing, which is different when he's awake. Awake, he breathes with awareness, each breath slightly measured, slightly controlled, asleep. He breathes with the same wet heaviness as everyone else in the room, the city's air moving through lungs that have been processing it for decades. You've known him for 2 days, and already he has the particular weight of someone you've known longer. This happens here. In the compressed circumstances of the rope, acquaintances form quickly, because there's nothing to slow them, no social ceremony, no time for gradual revelation. You know things about Thomas that you wouldn't have known about a colleague at the factory after a year. You know that his wife died 4 years ago. You know that they had no children, which is both a grief and, in his current circumstances, a specific kind of relief. You know that his handwriting is still good. He showed you once, tracing letters on the back of a piece of brown paper someone had discarded. Precise, even copperplate, the handwriting of a man who was trained in it and practiced it daily for 11 years, and whose hands haven't forgotten even if his station in life has changed dramatically. You know that he keeps a list. A small folded piece of paper, kept in the inside pocket of the coat. The good coat that remembers being better. On the paper is a list of names and addresses, businesses mostly, places he's written to, looking for clerical work, shipping companies, import-export firms, solicitors' offices. Some of the names have been crossed off, most of them. I made inquiries at Henderson's on the commercial road, he told you yesterday morning, as you walked together toward the mission on Flower and Dean Street. 8 months ago, I had dealings with them when I was at Alston's. I thought perhaps a previous connection might carry some weight. Did it? He was quiet for a moment in that particular way he had of being quiet, which was never empty but always contained something being considered. "The man I spoke with at Henderson's 8 months ago is no longer there himself," he said. "His position was also rationalised. He said the word the way you'd say something that tasted bad. Precise and exact, and not quite hiding the flavour of it. A dog barks somewhere in the street outside. 2, 3, 4 sharp barks, and then nothing. The city's nighttime sounds. You think about Edward in Kent. You could write to him. You have the address. You could write, using the paper and pencil you still have. One of the few things you carried from the room in Bethnal Green that aren't food or clothing or money. You could write and say, 'I need help. I am at the rope. Come and get me or send money or tell me something.' You don't write. Not yet. Not while there's still a possibility that tomorrow will produce work and next week will produce enough coin to get back to the 4-penny doss and the week after that to some kind of room again. You hold the possibility of Edward like a reserve, the last option, the thing you haven't spent yet. Sometime after 4 in the morning you sleep. Not deeply, not in any way that could be called rest, but you lose consciousness for periods, drifting under and surfacing, the rope catching you each time you lose the thread of being awake, holding you at this strange threshold between rest and waking. That is the specific gift and the specific curse of the twopenny rope. You dream, briefly, of the factory, the smell of sawdust and fresh-cut wood, which is one of the better smells you know from experience, the sound of machinery, which you hated when you worked there, and which in the dream is almost comforting, because it means you have somewhere to be, something to do, a wage at the end of the week. Then the dream shifts, the way dreams do, and you're in the village in Kent and it's summer and the smell is completely different. Grass and earth and something blooming, and your mother is saying something to you that you can't quite hear, and you're trying to get closer to hear it. But the distance between you keeps the same regardless of how you move. Then you wake up. The room is grey. The gaslight has been turned down during the night, and now the room is lit only by the early morning coming through the window, which is not much light but is enough to show you the shapes of 20-odd people, arranged along the rope like birds on a wire. Some of them are still asleep, some are stirring, some are already awake and looking at nothing with the fixed expression of people who have spent the night processing something and haven't arrived at any conclusion. The door to the room opens. The deputy comes in. He's a short man. You noticed this the first night. Short and wide, with a face that has been shaped by years of seeing the same thing every night and having no particular feelings about it anymore. He carries a stick, not for violence primarily, but for the prod, the shoulder touch that says time's up. He doesn't speak. He crosses to the rope. He takes out a knife, a short, thick knife, blade worn from years of this same action, and he cuts it. The rope drops. In the second before it drops, there's a quality of sound in the room that you can't quite name. Not silence, because several people are still breathing audibly. One is coughing. The door is creaking on its hinge, but something like silence. The held moment before the rope gives. Then it drops, and 20-odd people fall forward. Not dramatically, there's no cry, no crash. Just a collective lurch. 20-odd bodies suddenly deprived of the thing they were leaning on. 20-odd pairs of hands reaching for something to grab. 20-odd spines suddenly reminded of the position they're supposed to be in. The young boy on your left actually topples sideways. He hits the floor with a flat thump and a grunt, and lies there for a moment with a look on his face that is simultaneously outrage and resignation. Thomas Hewitt catches himself on the post. His hand goes to it with the precision of someone who has done this before, who knew it was coming, who was ready. You catch yourself on nothing. You stagger forward 2 steps and stop. Your back screams. The muscles that have been holding the compensating shape for 8 hours suddenly ask to do something different. The deputy is already moving through the room, stick out, touching shoulders, opening the door to the street. Time's up. You're on the street by 6:15. The street is Dorset Street, which is one of those names in this city that carries particular weight. Not famous weight, not the weight of monuments or events you read about in history books. The other weight, the weight of reputation, the weight of being known as a certain kind of place, and known specifically and not well. Dorset Street in 1888 is one of the worst streets in London. This is not a relative assessment. It's the assessment of the people who study these things, the social reformers and the journalists and the investigators who came with their notebooks to catalogue exactly what a Victorian slum looks like from the inside. They looked at Dorset Street and made notes, and some of them wrote articles and some of them wrote books, and all of them, leaving, felt something that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite guilt and was probably some complicated combination of both. The lodging houses on Dorset Street are known to the police, known to the missionaries, known to anyone who has reason to know such things in this part of London. McCarthy's, the one you came from, is not the worst of them. This is an important distinction. McCarthy's is not the worst of them. You try to hold on to this as something. The street at 6:15 in the morning in November is the particular grey of London in November, which is a specific grey, not the clean grey of overcast skies in the countryside, but the grey that comes from the particular combination of coal smoke and fog and the Thames nearby and the density of bodies and fires and industry all pressing against the air until it becomes a colour you couldn't reproduce if you tried. Your breath shows. Thomas is behind you, buttoning his coat. He buttons it deliberately, each button in sequence from the bottom, with the care of someone whose coat is one of the last things standing between him and something he doesn't want to think about. Soup kitchen doesn't open until 8, he says. Mission on Flower and Dean doesn't open until 7. I know. There's a coffee stall on Commercial Street, a halfpenny for a cup. It's usually there by 6:30. I've been. He nods. This is how conversation operates here. Not the slow building of social interaction, not the gradual revelation. The immediate exchange of practical information, because practical information is currency, and you trade it like currency. I'm going to try the docks today, you say. Thomas doesn't say anything immediately. He pulls his collar up against the cold, the coat collar that retains, in the cut of it, the memory of having been worn to an office. The casual labour system at the docks, he says finally. I've tried it. It's... He stops, considers. There are several hundred men at the gates for perhaps 40 positions, on a good day. I know that. And the hiring is... He stops again. There are systems in place, loyalties. Men who are known to the foreman get priority. Men who bring a bottle for the foreman. Men whose cousin's brother's friend has a word in. I know that too. Then you know it's not a reliable system. I know it's what I've got. He looks at you. In the cold grey light of Dorset Street at 6:15 in the morning, Thomas Hewitt, former clerk, the good coat, the 11 years of knowing tonnage, looks at you with an expression that isn't pity and isn't judgment, and is something between the two and beyond both of them. Yes, he says. I suppose it is. You walk together to the coffee stall. Commercial Street is already moving. This is one of the things about the East End that never stops surprising you. Coming from a village where the day began slowly and ended the same way, this place simply operates at a different speed. The market traders are setting up. The factory whistles are starting. Women with shawls pulled tight are walking quickly towards something, somewhere. The particular walk of people who are already late for the thing they need to be on time for. The coffee stall is a cart, really. A man with a large urn and a collection of thick pottery cups and a small spirit lamp to keep the urn warm. The coffee is not good coffee. It is coffee in the same technical sense that the rope is shelter, which is to say it meets the minimum requirement of the definition and little else. But it's hot, and your hands wrap around the cup, and the heat moves through your palms and up your arms, and for the length of time it takes to drink a cup of something hot, you are a person who is warm, which is not nothing. Thomas drinks his coffee with his eyes on the street. He does this, you've noticed. Watches the street the way you watch the street now, scanning. Not for danger specifically, though danger is part of it, but for information. For the thing that's different from yesterday. The thing that might indicate something. A crowd somewhere. A cart with goods. A queue forming. Queues mean something is being distributed, and distributed things might include work or food or both. The Salvation Army is opening a shelter, Thomas says, watching a woman with a basket of something wrapped in cloth moving quickly past. New one. Somewhere on Whitechapel Road, I think. Larger than the usual sort. They're saying 2p a night for a bed. A proper bed. You look at him. 2p, you say. That's what I heard. The man at Henderson's told me. Or rather, the man who used to be at Henderson's and is now somewhere on the same circuit as us. 2p for a proper bed. 1p more than the rope. 1p is both a trivial amount and an amount you don't reliably have. But if you could get a day's work at the docks, even half a day, even a few shillings for moving boxes from one place to another, 2p becomes achievable. I'll go today, you say. The docks or the Salvation Army? The docks first? The army shelter after? He nods, finishes his coffee, sets the cup down with the kind of deliberate care that's become a habit, the preservation of small dignities. I'll come to the docks, he says. I've tried the letters. The letters aren't working. This is, you realise, a significant statement from Thomas. 8 months of letters, 8 months of careful copperplate on borrowed paper, 8 months of presenting himself through the medium of words he's good at on a surface that shows none of the coat or the smell or the particular weight of 8 months of the circuit, 8 months of that, and now he's saying, the letters aren't working. You walk toward the river. The docks are not one place. They're a system. West India docks, London docks, St. Catherine docks, Surrey docks on the south side, the East India docks further downriver, a whole geography of commerce stretching along the Thames for miles, and at each set of gates, every morning at 6, sometimes 5, sometimes earlier, hundreds of men gather to wait. The hiring at the docks is called the call. It happens at the gate. The foreman comes out and he looks at the crowd of men and he picks. There's no application. There's no queue. There's no order to it that you can discern from the outside, though from the inside, Thomas is right. There are systems, there are loyalties, there are the men who've worked here for years and who the foreman knows, and there are the men who've never worked here, who are strangers, who are desperate, who are hundreds of men all trying to catch the same eye. You get to the London docks at 7:30. The crowd at the gate is already enormous. This is the thing about poverty in this city, the thing that the economics of it does to you. It makes you compete with people in exactly the same situation. Everyone here is trying to get work. Everyone here needs it. The man to your left and the man to your right and the man behind you, all of you trying to occupy the same space. trying to be the one the foreman looks at, trying to be the face that reads as useful, capable, worth a shilling. The smell of this crowd is different from the smell of the rope house. This is the smell of men who have been awake for hours already, who walked here in the cold, who are perhaps further along in their desperation than you are, or perhaps less far. Some of them are steady, some of them are shaking, and the shaking isn't cold, or isn't only cold. The gate opens. The foreman is a broad man in a wool overcoat that costs more than your week's wages did, back when you had wages. He comes out of the gate and he looks at the crowd, and the crowd surges toward him, and the noise is immediate. A wall of voices, men calling out, reaching forward, some of them holding things up, tokens or references or something else. And the foreman moves through it with the patience of someone who has done this every morning for years and has developed a method. He picks. You watch the method. You've watched it before, but you watch again, trying to understand it, trying to learn it the way you learned the wood at the factory, from the inside. He doesn't look at faces first. He looks at hands. He reaches into the crowd, and he takes someone's hand, and he turns it over and he looks at it, the palms, the knuckles, and then he nods, or he doesn't, and if he nods the man is in, and if he doesn't the man goes back. Hands. He's looking at the evidence in the hands. Years of work. The kind of work that builds specific calluses in specific places, the kind of work that leaves marks. He's reading them for what they know. He's assessing in 10 seconds what a man's hands have done. Your hands. You hold them up when the foreman gets close enough. The hands of someone who spent 3 years working with wood, with machines, with the particular physical labour of factory furniture. The calluses are there. They're real. The evidence is there. He looks at your hands. He looks at your face. He moves past you. 40 men, roughly, go through the gate. The crowd doesn't disperse immediately. It stays for a few minutes, the way a crowd stays after something that's over, processing the fact of it, and then gradually it begins to break apart, men moving away in ones and twos, going to the next gate, the next hope. Thomas is still next to you. He didn't put his hands up. They don't want clerks' hands, he says simply. You walk back up toward the city. The streets are fuller now. Fully morning, the tide of the working day well in. Children on their way to school, or not on their way to school, playing in doorways, running behind horses to collect the dung for resale. A commercial instinct that arrives apparently automatically in children born into this part of London. Vendors, carts, the noise. The fog is thicker here, caught between the buildings, the particular London fog that is partly weather and partly the city's own exhalation. The smoke from 400,000 domestic fires and 1,000 factory chimneys mixing with the damp November air until it becomes something with texture, something you can almost feel on your skin. The Mission on Flower and Dean Street opens at 7. The Mission is run by a woman named Mrs. Hartley, who is one of those people in this city who exist in the gap between the world as it is and the world as it should be, and who seem to operate from some source of energy that has nothing to do with sleep or food or any of the conventional fuels. She's 40 perhaps, or 50, with the kind of face that has been through weather and come out knowing things. She wears plain dark dresses. She doesn't treat you like a project. This distinction matters more than you would have expected before you needed to know these things. The Mission has a room with wooden benches and a fireplace that actually works, and soup at 7, and bread, and a cup of tea if there's enough tea. The soup is always something simple. usually a thin liquid with vegetables and occasionally some unidentifiable meat, but it's hot and it's calories and it exists. You sit on a bench with a bowl of soup and a piece of bread and you eat. The eating itself has changed since the rope. You noticed it last week. Back when you had a room and a regular meal, you ate the way you'd eaten your whole life, with a vague awareness of the food and a primary awareness of other things, the conversation, the plans for later, whatever. Now eating has a quality of attention to it that you didn't know before. You notice the heat of the soup reaching your stomach. You notice the way the bread feels in your hand, slightly stale at the crust, softer toward the centre. You notice the exact moment when hunger begins to recede, that specific shift in the quality of your attention when food is no longer the primary emergency. Thomas eats beside you. He eats the same way with the same focused attention, and you don't talk while eating. Neither of you, because this is a kind of work and you do it properly. There are 12, 15 people in the mission room. Most of them you recognise from the rope, or from this same room at other times. The rotation of the circuit, the faces that appear and disappear and reappear, always roughly the same, always with slight variations, slightly thinner, or slightly better, or slightly harder than last time. There's a woman at the end of the bench who you haven't seen before. Young or not old, hard to tell with certainty in this light with this life on her face. She has a baby on her lap wrapped in a shawl, and the baby is sleeping, and the woman is eating her soup with one hand and holding the baby with the other, with the efficiency of someone who has been doing this for long enough that it's automatic. You don't stare. You don't make her situation into something to look at. But you're aware of her the way you're aware of everything in these rooms, with the peripheral alertness that comes from learning to track your environment for useful information. Mrs. Hartley comes to the table with more bread. She sets it down without ceremony. She doesn't say anything blessing-related. She doesn't make a speech about salvation or gratitude or the importance of pulling oneself up. She sets down the bread and she looks around the room with the eye of someone taking stock and she says, "There's work at the laundry on Hanbury Street for women with references, if anyone knows someone." The woman with the baby doesn't look up. Mrs. Hartley's eye moves on. She looks at you, not in a way that singles you out, in the way she looks at everyone, which is direct and without particular sentiment. "Casual work for men loading at the warehouse on Brushfield Street today," she says. "Pay is £1 for the morning. They need 5 men and they'll take them on the walk." Thomas puts down his spoon. "What time?" you ask. 8. Ask for Mr. Crane." You look at Thomas. He looks at you. You both stand up. The warehouse is on Brushfield Street, which runs along the north side of Spitalfields Market. The market is already in full roar at this hour, vegetables and fruit being unloaded from the carts that have been arriving since before dawn. The traders setting up their stalls, the wholesale buyers moving through with purpose. The smell of Spitalfields Market in the morning is extraordinary. Not clean, exactly, but alive in a way that cuts through the grey of everything else. The ripe smell of vegetables and fruit, the sweet sharp edge of apples and the green heaviness of cabbages and the earthy gravity of potatoes by the ton. The warehouse is at the eastern end of the street. A brick building, 4 stories, with loading doors at each level, and a crane arm that extends out over the street for moving goods up and down. Mr. Crane, despite the name, has nothing to do with the crane. He's a tall man with a sandy beard who comes out of the side door at exactly 8 o'clock and looks at the 6 men waiting there. 6 men, 5 positions. He looks at the 6 of you, takes his time, looks at the hands, He picks Thomas. He picks you. He picks 3 others. The 6th man, who arrived first and has been standing in the cold the longest, walks away without a word. The work is loading. Boxes of something heavy that turns out to be tinned goods. Crates of them stacked in the warehouse that need to go onto a cart. The boxes weigh about £30 each, and you carry them in pairs, one under each arm, from the stack to the cart, 12, 15 feet, back again, and again, and again. In 20 minutes you're warm for the first time in weeks. In an hour you're sweating despite the cold, your shirt wet under your coat, your hands red from the rough wood of the crates, the weight of them making your arms ache in the specific way that comes from repetitive labour. Thomas works beside you. He's stronger than he looks, or than you expected, and you realise that the 11 years of clerical work weren't the beginning of his story. That before the shipping office there was something else, some earlier version of Thomas Hewitt that involved this kind of work, that built these capabilities. You don't ask. You carry boxes. At 12, Mr. Crane counts out the wages, a shilling each. 12 pennies, which feels in your palm like a different kind of weight than 30 pounds of tinned goods, the weight of possibility. A shilling is 12 pennies. The rope is 2 pennies. The soup kitchen is free. Bread from the baker's discount sale is a penny. That leaves 9 pennies. 9 pennies is not the army shelter. The army shelter with the proper bed is 2 pennies more than the rope. 11 pennies is the army shelter, if you can find 2 more pennies between now and tonight. You and Thomas walk back toward Whitechapel, the coins in your pockets. I'm going to try the letters again, Thomas says. This afternoon. There's a firm on Aldgate High Street that I haven't approached yet. You nod. This is the rhythm of it. Work in the morning if there's work. Letters in the afternoon, whatever there is in the evening. The Salvation Army shelter, you say, on Whitechapel Road. Should we try it tonight? Thomas considers. It's 2pence, he says. I know. I have the shilling. After bread and something to eat I'll have... He does the calculation in his head, quickly, the clerking habit. About 8pence, I think. If the soup kitchen covers supper, I'll have about the same. 2pence for the shelter. If we can find 2 more pence between us, he nods. I'll try the firm on Aldgate. Sometimes... He stops, starts again. Sometimes they need messages carried. It's not dignified, but it's pennies. You go your separate ways at Aldgate High Street. You've been thinking about what Thomas said, about the calling of the docks, the hands, the reading of what hands have done. You've been thinking about what else in this city hires casually, what else is available without references, without a history in a specific trade. There's the building work. The city is always building. This is one of the genuinely true things about London in this decade, that it never stops building, that there are always scaffolds somewhere, always foundations being dug, or walls being raised, or roofs being covered, and the labour for this is hired daily at the sites, and the pay is rough, but it's there. You walk toward the area near Aldgate where a new building has been going up for weeks, a warehouse or perhaps a small factory. You've never been close enough to tell. The scaffolding is up the full height of it, 3 stories. Men move on the scaffolding like figures in a drawing, distant and precise. The site foreman is a man called Briggs, who has the weathered look of a man who has spent 30 years outdoors in English weather, which means he looks like English weather in human form. He looks at your hands. He nods. 2 hours of hauling bricks. Not the refined process of the warehouse, just the necessary one. Bricks going up the scaffold in chains of men passing them hand to hand. The weight of each brick may be 3 pounds, and the rate of transfer fast enough that in 2 hours you pass maybe 800 bricks, and your arms are something different from what they were when you started. 2 pennies. You stand in the street and look at them and calculate. A shilling from the warehouse, 2 pennies from the bricks, bread for a penny, soup kitchen for supper if it's open. That leaves the Salvation Army shelter at 2 pennies achievable. It is a small thing. It is just shelter. It is just the difference between the rope and a bed. But it is a bed. You find Thomas at the mission at 5 o'clock. He has 8 pence from the shilling and from some message carrying he did for the firm on Aldgate, which turned out to need messages carried after all. Tonight, you say. Tonight, he agrees. The Salvation Army shelter on Whitechapel Road is newer than the lodging houses. You can tell from the smell, or rather from the absence of the specific kind of old building smell that the lodging houses have. This building hasn't been here long enough to accumulate the particular archive of other people's years that McCarthy's has. The walls still have paint on them that isn't grey yet. The floorboards haven't been worn smooth by the traffic of many winters. The man at the door is in Salvation Army uniform, dark with the red trim. He takes your 2pence without a moral lecture, which is something you were prepared for and which doesn't happen, and he gives you a brass disc with a number on it that corresponds to a numbered bed in a room upstairs. Room number 4, bed number 11. 11 is at the window end. There are 12 beds in the room, wooden frames with canvas and a blanket. Not thick blankets, not the kind of blankets that entirely solve the problem of November, but blankets. You sit on the edge of the bed. The canvas gives slightly under your weight, a giving that is nothing like the rope, that is the giving of something designed to receive a horizontal body, to support the configuration of a person lying down, which is the configuration you were built for. Thomas is in bed 13, across the narrow aisle. You lie down. The ceiling of this room is plain white plaster with a water stain in one corner that has been allowed to dry out. The window has curtains, thin ones, through which the gaslight from Whitechapel Road makes a yellow stripe across the floor. You lie flat. Your spine, which has been compensating for 3 days of rope, begins to recalibrate. This takes about 10 minutes of distinct individual discomfort as each part of your back remembers what it's for and renegotiates its relationship with the surface under it. But then, slowly, the ache shifts from active to residual, from something requiring attention to something that's just there. Background, like the sound of the street. Thomas is already asleep. You can hear it in his breathing. Outside, Whitechapel Road continues. You can hear it through the window, the traffic, the voices, someone singing drunkenly from the direction of a public house half a block away. The city goes on. It always goes on. This is simultaneously its most comforting and most unnerving quality. You think about the day, 1 shilling and 2 pennies earned, 1 shilling and 2pence spent on food and shelter. Net result, 0. You're exactly where you were this morning in terms of funds, but you slept on a rope last night and you'll sleep on a bed tonight, and that's something. And you'll try the docks tomorrow, and the warehouse on Brushfield Street might need men again Thursday. This is the arithmetic of this life. Not saving, not building, just maintaining, just keeping the same thin margin between yourself and the street that you had yesterday, hoping it stays consistent, hoping nothing changes in the wrong direction. You close your eyes. The bed is enough. It is enough. Sleep comes quickly, more quickly than you expected. Your body, which has been managing the rope for 3 days, recognizes the bed as something different, and takes the opportunity with the enthusiasm of a system that has been underfunded for too long and has suddenly had the account refilled. You dream of nothing significant, just the blurry internal cinema of deep sleep, shapes and fragments that won't be there when you wake up. When you wake up, it's because of the sound, not the cutting of the rope. No rope here, just a bell, somewhere downstairs, rung once, twice. The signal that morning has come and the beds are needed for the men who will come tonight, who are now out in the streets that you're heading back to. 6:30. Thomas is already sitting up, buttoning the coat. Always the coat, always the buttons in sequence. You get up. And then 2 more weeks of this. The weeks have a texture now that's distinct from the weeks before them in a way you couldn't have articulated before, but that you understand now from the inside. The weeks before, the factory weeks, the weeks with the room and the regular wage, had a different kind of repetition. The same work each day, but punctuated by a wage at the end of the week, which punctuated further by a small improvement in circumstances, or at least the maintenance of them, punctuated by a Sunday that was different from the weekdays, punctuated by things to look forward to, small ones, a meal that was better than usual, a visit to the park. These weeks have no punctuation, they're continuous, one day into the next. The same circuit, the same gates, the same faces, the same calculation every evening of what tonight will cost and whether tonight is possible. The days where work materializes and the days where it doesn't, and the difference between those days is everything, and also sometimes the difference is only a few pennies, and you can't tell in advance which kind of day it is. You learn things. You learn which hiring foremen are fixed and which are movable, which of them can be worked on with consistency and appearance, and the specific kind of deference that reads as capable rather than desperate. You learn that desperate men don't get hired, not because foremen are cruel, necessarily, but because desperate men make mistakes, their hands shake, their judgment is compromised, and a shaking man with compromised judgment is liability. So you learn not to look desperate. This is harder than it sounds. Thomas is better at it than you. He has 11 years of presenting himself through an alternate surface, 11 years of presenting the letter rather than the man, and he can do the same thing now in person, can inhabit the coat so completely that you stop seeing it as the remnant of a former life and start seeing it as simply his coat, the coat of Thomas Hewitt, who is here at your gate because he chooses to be. He's still not getting hired. The hands, you are getting hired, not always, not reliably, but the 3 years of factory work, the specific calluses in the specific places, this reads correctly to the men who do the reading. On the days when you're hired and Thomas isn't, you share the wage. He doesn't ask you to. He doesn't refuse when you do. He takes it with a particular stillness, the way you'd receive something that cost you nothing to give, but cost the giver something to offer, understanding the full weight of the transaction on both sides. "I'm going to write to my sister," he says one evening. "She lives in Camberwell, married a butcher, a decent man." You look at him. He pauses. "I've been reluctant. I told her I was doing well 6 months ago. I wrote and said the position was temporary, but there were prospects." "Were there?" "There were things that could have been described as prospects by someone motivated to describe them that way." He's quiet for a moment. "I can't sustain the fiction much longer." "No, it's the winter. I can't do this in the winter. The rope in January, in February." He shakes his head. "You're younger. Your body manages differently." "It's November. January is 2 months away." 2 months of the rope or the army shelter or whatever the circuit provides, and then January, which is the month in London when the cold stops being a condition and becomes a cause. People die in January. You know this now in a way you didn't know it before. Not abstractly, not as a statistic. You know it from the faces in the soup kitchen, the faces that disappear between 1 week and the next, and you don't ask what happened to them because the answers are either illness, or the river, or the casual ward, and none of them are better than the others. Write to your sister, you say. Yes, he says. I think I must. The Salvation Army shelter is where you are. That night and the night after and the nights after that. On the good days, the days with work. The rope when the work doesn't come. The penny sit-up twice. When things are very tight. When the choice is between a penny for the rope and a penny for food, and you choose food. The penny sit-up is exactly as Thomas described it, and also worse than you expected, even knowing exactly what it was going to be. The benches are hard, the room is cold. The deputy walks the aisles every 20 minutes with his stick, and he doesn't prod hard enough to bruise, but he prods firmly enough to make clear that sleep is not what this place is for, which makes you wonder what exactly a penny sit-up is for if not sleep, and the answer you eventually understand is warmth, and not much of that either, and survival, barely, and the particular stubbornness of people who've decided they are not going to sleep in a doorway tonight and are paying a penny for the right to that decision. Around you at the penny sit-up are people at different points in the same story. Some of them are where you were 3 weeks ago, stunned still by the newness of it, unable to fully comprehend that this is their location in the world right now. Some of them have been here much longer and have the settled quality of people who have accepted something, not cheerfully, not gratefully, just accepted it as the truth of things. There's a man named Garrett who you see at both the rope and the sit-up, alternating based on some calculation you can't quite follow. He's in his late 30s, narrow-faced, with the look of someone who was thin to begin with, and has been thinned further. He used to work in the printing trade, he tells you one morning at the soup kitchen. Compositor. He knew the lead type by touch, could set a page faster than you could read it. The printing trade, like the furniture trade, has been rationalising. New machines, he says, with a flatness in his voice that's beyond bitterness, that's arrived somewhere on the other side of it. Compositors we used to have 40 at my firm. They've got 12 now and machines of the rest. What are the other 28 doing? He looks at the table. Some found places, smaller shops, places that can't afford the machines yet. Some went to other trades. Some... He shrugs. It's a very particular shrug, the shrug that means the same as this. My hands know letters, he says. 40 years of trade and my hands know letters by shape, by weight, by the particular feel of lead type in your fingers. What do I do with that? You don't have an answer. He doesn't expect one. The missionaries come to the shelter sometimes. Not just the Salvation Army people who run the place and are present always, but others, evangelical groups, temperance societies, charitable organisations of various kinds. People who have decided that the condition of the poor is a problem to be addressed through some combination of religion and instruction and clean habits. Some of them are useful. Some of them have connections to employers or to charitable funds that can pay for tools or training or the deposit on a room. Some of them are less useful, more focused on the instruction part than the practical part, more interested in explaining why you're here than in helping you to not be here. A man comes to the shelter one Tuesday evening with a notebook. He's not a missionary. He wears good clothes, not ostentatiously good, but clearly not the clothes of someone using the shelter. He has the look of someone who has decided to go somewhere unusual and is trying to look like it's not unusual, which is a look you've become expert at identifying. He sits at the end of one of the tables and he talks to people. He listens. He writes things down. He's a journalist. He tells you when he gets to you. For a newspaper in the Strand, writing about the shelter system and its effects on the people who use it. You think about what to tell him. You think about Edward in Kent, about what Edward would think reading in a newspaper about his cousin William Marsh, 23 years old, formerly of a furniture factory in Bethnal Green, currently of the Twopenny Rope, or, on good days, the Salvation Army shelter. I prefer not to be named, you say. He nods. He writes something. He asks about how you came to be here, what work you're looking for, what you think of the shelters, whether you've been to the workhouse. The workhouse. No, you say. Why not? You think about this. The workhouse is the formal safety net. It's the thing the state provides, or the poor law guardians provide, or the ratepayers provide, depending on how you think about where things come from. You go to the workhouse when you have nothing else. You go and you declare yourself destitute and they take you in. They give you a bed and food in exchange. They give you work, stone breaking, oakum picking, which is the unravelling of old rope into its component fibres, which then get used in caulking ships. Work designed to be unpleasant enough that only people who have genuinely run out of alternatives will do it, which is its own kind of social engineering, which has its own logic, however brutal. You go in and you come out. That's the theory. You stabilise, you recover, you leave when you're able. The reality's more complicated. Once you're in, leaving is harder than it sounds. The workhouse has rules. You can't leave without notice. You can't take your possessions with you without approval. The system creates a gravity that pulls people further in rather than pushing them back out. The workhouse is the end of the road. Everyone on the circuit knows it. The circuit exists partly because of the workhouse, because the circuit is all the alternatives to the workhouse, all the things you try before you go there, all the ways you maintain the belief that you are managing, that you are still in motion, still part of the city's active population rather than its managed one. I'm still finding work, you say to the journalist. Casual but regular enough. As long as I can find work, there's no need for the workhouse. He writes this down too. He asks you how you manage in the cold, what you do for food, what the other men are like. You tell him, carefully, selecting. You don't tell him about Thomas. You don't know why exactly. Some instinct that Thomas's story is not yours to give. After the journalist leaves, the room settles back into its evening rhythm. Men on the benches, the stove working, the smell of the room, which is something you barely notice now, which has become simply the smell of where you are, the same way the smell of the factory became the smell of where you were, the way all smells eventually become neutral if you live inside them long enough. Thomas comes in at 9. He's been to the post office on Commercial Street. He sent the letter to his sister. He doesn't say much about it, just that it's done. He sits down on the bench and he looks at the stove with the expression of a man who has made a decision, and is now in the period between making the decision and knowing if it was right, which is a period that has its own specific quality of discomfort. She'll reply, you say. Probably, he says. She is a practical woman. Whatever she thinks of the situation, she'll say something practical. He pauses. I'm not sure what she'll think of the situation. You don't say anything to this, he continues. We were not a family that discussed money. My father was a clerk also, and my mother kept the household on what he brought, and she never spoke of what it cost her to do it, and I never asked, and we were all comfortable in our comfortable fiction that we were comfortable. A small pause. I told my sister I was doing well, he says, as recently as 6 months ago. As I mentioned, this will require some revision. He says it dryly, with the particular humour of someone who has decided that humour is the only remaining dignified response to certain situations. You eat supper from the soup kitchen, brought around by a young woman in a Salvation Army bonnet who is perhaps 17, and moves through the room with the focused competence of someone who is doing exactly what she believes she should be doing. Thin soup, bread, tea, the same as every night, the same as last week and the week before. This is the thing you didn't know about poverty before you were in it, that it's repetitive in a way that wealth never is. When you had money, even very little money, there was variety. You could choose. You could have this bread or that bread, this kind of meal or another. Poverty removes choice, and with it removes variety, and with it removes time. Because without variety, time has no texture, days have no distinction, everything merges into the same continuous present. You know what day it is. You count them. You have to count them because certain things happen on certain days. The mission is closed Sunday. The docks do different hiring on Saturday. Some of the employers operate on a weekly cycle, and knowing where you are in that cycle matters. It's Thursday. Almost 4 weeks since the room in Bethnal Green. 4 weeks. You lie on the canvas bed in the army shelter that night and you do the arithmetic that you've been avoiding. 4 weeks. In the 4 weeks you've earned, total, combining all the casual days, about 3 shillings and sixpence. You've spent about 3 shillings on shelter, 2 shillings on food. You're about 4 pence ahead of where you were 4 weeks ago. 4 pence. At this rate, getting back to a room, a real room, weekly rent, a key, a space that's yours, requires something like 2 shillings for the deposit and a week's rent in advance, which is at least another shilling, which at 4 pence a week of net savings is 11 weeks away. 11 weeks is February. The cold settles on you, but it's not the cold of the room, because the room is relatively warm tonight. Someone fed the stove and it's actually working properly. It's a different cold. The cold of arithmetic. You write to Edward that night. You borrow paper from the army woman with the bonnet, who produces it from somewhere without drama, and you write. You don't explain everything. You explain enough. You say, the factory closed. You say, I'm on casual work. You say, I'm managing. But it would help to know your advice on the situation. You don't say, I'm sleeping on a rope some nights. You don't say, I'm frightened of February. You say, I'm managing, which is true, just true enough to write. The morning comes. You find work at the building site on Commercial Road, a different site from the old gate one, newer, larger, with more men working and a more systematic hiring. 6 shillings a week for regular men. You're not a regular man, you're a casual man. But there's space on the casual list, and the foreman, a man named Patterson, who has the look of someone who once did this work himself and remembers it from the inside, adds your name. 2 days on the Commercial Road site. Real work, sustained work, the kind that builds momentum, that allows your body to find its rhythm, the specific muscles required to haul and carry and lever, waking up and strengthening and becoming more reliable. On the second day, Patterson says, come back Monday. Monday. The day after tomorrow is Sunday, which is a rest day. And after Sunday is Monday, and on Monday Patterson wants you back. This is, in its modest scale, everything. You tell Thomas at supper. He looks at you with the expression that has become familiar on his face. the one that combines genuine pleasure for you with something that is not quite envy, but is close enough to be its neighbour. Good, he says, that's good. If it holds, you say. Yes, if it holds. It holds. The weeks after that have a different texture. Not transformed, not suddenly solved. The circuit remains the circuit, the shelter and the soup kitchen, and the cold mornings and the long walks and the work when it comes and the hours when it doesn't. But there's the anchor of the building site, Paterson, Monday and Tuesday and sometimes Wednesday if the work runs long, and the wages from those days create a small accumulation, actual accumulation, rather than the zero sum of the first weeks. Thomas writes to his sister. He gets a reply. He shows you the letter. It's a short letter from a woman in Camberwell. Practical, as he predicted. She says, "Come on Sunday. I'll have a room ready." There's work at the butcher's for someone reliable with a good hand for accounts. He reads it twice, and then he folds it back into its envelope and puts it in his inside pocket, in the pocket where the list of names and addresses lives, and he sits for a while saying nothing. Sunday, you say. Sunday, he says. Friday and Saturday pass. Sunday morning Thomas wakes at his usual time. He buttons the coat in sequence. He packs his things, which are not many things, into a bag that is not much of a bag. At the door of the shelter he shakes your hand. His hand is the hand of a man who spent 11 years in a shipping office, the handshake of a clerk, precise and firm and brief. Whitechapel Road to Camberwell, he says. That's quite a distance. Don't miss your train. He nods once. He walks down the steps and into the street and into the Sunday morning crowd on Whitechapel Road, and becomes a coat moving away from you in a crowd of other coats, until you can't distinguish him any longer. The room has 11 beds when Thomas leaves it. You're alone in a different way than you were before you met him. Not worse, just different. The circuit continues, and the people on it continue, and the soup kitchen and the shelter and the site on Commercial Road continue. December comes. The cold becomes serious. Not the polite cold of November, the cold that inconveniences. December cold is an argument, a case being made by the city's weather against the idea of existing in it without the right preparation. The fog is thicker. The ice on the puddles in the morning is thicker. The men in the soup kitchen have an additional layer about them, not just clothes, but something internal, the particular settling in of people who have decided they're going to survive this and have put everything else aside to make that decision firm. The building site slows, not stops, but slows. The ground is harder to work. The mortar doesn't set right below a certain temperature. Some of the work goes indoors, internal work, plastering and fitting, and Paterson keeps his regular men for that, and the casual list gets shorter. You're on the regular list now, just barely. 2 names above the line below, which Paterson will cut on bad days. You stay above the line by arriving first and working last and doing anything Paterson asks without complaint or hesitation, and occasionally, when the foreman's not looking, doing work that's technically beyond what you were hired for because you've learned it from watching, and because demonstrating capability is its own kind of currency in these circumstances. Paterson notices. He doesn't say anything directly. He's not a man who says things directly. But he stops looking at you with the particular neutrality he gives to men he doesn't know yet, and starts looking at you with something else, some faint category of familiarity that is not yet trust but is adjacent to it. You get regular wages through December. The wages accumulate. You move from the army shelter to a 4-penny doss in early December. A real bed, nightly. The canvas is not much better than the army shelter canvas, but the blanket is heavier and the room is smaller and therefore warmer. Then, just before Christmas, the letters. You hear from Edward. His letter arrives at the post office on Commercial Street where you've been collecting. You gave him the address weeks ago when you wrote, telling him to direct any reply here. Edward writes in the same confident large hand as always. He says, "I'm better now. The lungs are better. I'm working again, at a mill in Faversham, not the city, but work is work." He says, "Come home if you need to." He says, "There's a room here." He says, "Mother asks after you." He says, "Come home." You read the letter twice on the steps of the post office while the December traffic moves around you. The Christmas shopping crowd with their packages and their urgency and their complete ignorance of the fact that you exist. Come home. You fold the letter, you put it in your pocket, you walk to the building site on Commercial Road. Patterson is there with the day's orders and a look on his face that suggests something has changed. He pulls you aside at 9 o'clock. "Steady work," he says. "It's not a question, and it's not an offer yet, and it's not nothing either. I've got a project in January, full duration, 6 weeks minimum. Regular wages, not casual. You want it?" You look at him. 6 weeks. 6 weeks of regular wages, 6 days a week, full rate. 6 weeks of regular wages is enough for a room, a real room. Weekly rent. A key. "Yes," you say. "Right," says Patterson, and he goes back to his work and you go back to yours. That evening you stand on Waterloo Bridge. You don't know why you came here. You walked, after the sight, through streets you've been learning for months, not toward the shelter directly, but in a direction that had some pull to it you couldn't quite name, and the pull turned out to be the bridge. Waterloo Bridge is wide and stone and cold tonight, the wind off the river coming at you from the east, with the force of something that started a long way away and has not been slowed by anything. The Thames below is black. Not the Thames of daytime, not the muddy brown river full of boats and commerce, and the practical business of a working port. The Thames at night is black and moving and ancient, something that was here before any of this and will be here after. The bridges and the wharves and the buildings and the people sleeping in them, or on them, or under arches beside them. On either side of the river, London glitters. This is what it looks like from above, from the bridge, from this middle point between north and south. Thousands of lights, gas lamps on every major street, candlelight in the windows behind them, the particular yellowish glow of a city that has not quite managed electricity everywhere yet, but is in the process, that exists in this transitional state where some streets are lit by gas and some by electric arc, and the difference between them is visible from here, the electric light harder and whiter and the gas warmer but not as bright, but not as... The dome of St. Paul's is visible to your left, against the sky that is never quite dark in this city because the city generates its own light even at night, the collective glow of a million fires and lamps bouncing off the low clouds. You think about Thomas. He's in Camberwell now, working at the butcher's accounts, in a room his sisters arranged. Warm, probably. Fed. His handwriting on pages that matter to someone. You think about Garrett, the printer, who you saw last at the penny sit-up in the second week and haven't seen since, which could mean anything. You think about the boy at the rope, the 15-year-old who slept with his arms across the cord like he was embracing it, who you never learned the name of. You think about Mrs. Hartley at the mission, setting down bread without ceremony. You think about Edward in Kent, writing in his confident hand. "Come home," Mother asks. The wind off the river is serious now. You turn your collar up. Below you the Thames moves, black and continuous, carrying everything, taking it toward the sea. From up here the city looks like what it is. The largest city in the world at the height of its own idea of itself. The centre of an empire. The place that everything flows into and out of, the money and the goods and the people, all of them arriving and moving and changing, and some of them staying and some of them going, and the city absorbing it all without particularly noticing. 5 million people. You were one of them. You were for a time one of the ones sleeping on a rope. One of the several thousand people in this city who pay twopence to lean against a hemp cord because twopence is what they have and the rope is what twopence buys. You were one of them and you're not anymore. Not tonight, because Patterson said steady work and January means a room. But you know now what you didn't know before. You know the other city. The city that exists between the one in the newspapers and the one in the slums. The one that the reformers write about and the journalists visit with their notebooks. You know it not as a visitor with a notebook, but as someone who slept in it, and ate in it, and worked in it, and stood in gates hoping to be picked, and sometimes was and sometimes wasn't. You know the price of a cup of coffee at 6 a.m. You know the weight of the rope under your arms. You know the sound of 20 people falling forward when the rope is cut. You know what Thomas Hewitt's 11 years in a shipping office looked like from the outside of a 4-penny DOS, and what his good coat meant, and what his copper plate handwriting was worth in a city that needed hands rather than letters. The wind. You lean against the bridge parapet and you look at the city and the city doesn't look back. This is one of the things about cities. They're not looking at you. The 5 million are not looking at you specifically. The whole great machinery of London is not aware of your presence or your absence. You could step off this bridge and the city would continue. The traffic on Waterloo Bridge would continue. The Thames would continue exactly and completely uninterrupted, as if you had never been here at all. This should be frightening. It is. A little. But it's also something else. Because the city doesn't notice you means the city doesn't hold you. There's no grip on you. No claim. You can be anything in this city within the limits of what the city allows. And those limits are real. And they're brutal in ways you now understand specifically and in your body, and not just abstractly. But within them, you're 23 years old. You came from a village in Kent with a letter of introduction and a bag that used to belong to your cousin. You learned wood at the factory. You learned brick at the site. You learned the rope and the sit-up and the mission and the docks at sunrise with hundreds of other men all raising their hands, and the particular humiliation of being visible as desperate, and the particular discipline of not letting that show, and the price of bread at closing time, and the temperature of the soup kitchen, and the sound of a morning bell in a Salvation Army shelter, and the way a canvas bed feels after 3 nights on a rope. You've learned this city. Not all of it. Not the version Thomas knew. The version with shipping offices and 11 years of reliable wage. Not the version the merchants in the counting houses know, or the journalists with their notebooks, or the reformers with their charitable organisations. Your version. The version between the rope and the building site on Commercial Road. The version that is still here, still being navigated by the men you ate soup with and slept near and watched fail and occasionally watched succeed, who are still there tonight at McCarthy's on Dorset Street, at the penny sit-up on Whitechapel Road, at whatever doorway, under whatever arch has enough warmth rising through the iron grating to make it worth the constable's notice. They're still there. The rope is still being paid for, nightly, by men who have 3p between them and a night to survive and no better option. You think about this on the bridge with the river below you, and the city spread out on both sides and the wind coming off the water, with the cold edge of something that started far away and arrived here having lost nothing. January is coming. January in London is not gentle, but Patterson said steady work. You push off from the parapet. You walk north, off the bridge, back into the city. Your boots on the stone, the gaslight throwing your shadow in front of you and then beside you and then behind as you pass each lamp. You pass a man asleep in a doorway, coat pulled tight, knees up. The particular arrangement of someone who has been doing this long enough to know the best geometry for it. You stop. The man doesn't move. He's asleep, properly asleep. The deep sleep of extreme cold exhaustion that looks peaceful from outside even when it isn't. You reach into your pocket. 2 pennies, the rope. Or a penny for something to eat in the morning, and another penny for something else. You put both pennies on the step beside the man's hand. You don't know if he'll find them before someone else does. You don't know if he'll know what they're for. You don't know anything about him, not his name or his trade or his 11 years or his village in Kent, or whether he has a cousin somewhere who wrote, "Come home." You put the pennies down. You walk. The December streets carry you north, toward Whitechapel, toward the shelter, toward the canvas bed and the single blanket and the morning when it all begins again. Above you, London. 5 million people, most of them asleep, most of them warm enough, most of them not thinking about the ones who aren't. Because that's how cities work. That's how any system works. The operational necessity of not thinking too carefully about the parts of it that are failing. Because if you thought carefully, you'd have to do something. And doing something is harder than not thinking. The gaslight flickers in the wind. The Thames is somewhere behind you now, carrying its dark water to the sea. The shelter is 3 streets ahead. You walk. This is what it is. This is what the bottom of things looks like. Not from outside with a notebook. Not in the abstract language of social reform or poverty statistics or parliamentary reports. Not in the clean columns of Henry Mayhew writing about the people he interviewed and the things they told him. This is the rope under your arms. This is the morning when it drops. This is the sound of 20 bodies falling forward in the grey light of 6 o'clock in a room that smells of wet wool and old hemp, and the particular exhaustion of people who didn't sleep enough and are going to have to do it all again tonight. This is Thomas Hewitt's coat. This is the foreman looking at your hands. This is the penny that was all you had for a meal, and the calculation of whether the meal or the shelter was the emergency, and the knowledge, acquired only from being in the middle of it, that this is not a temporary condition for everyone here, that for some of the people on the rope is the story, is the whole story, beginning to end. You get to the shelter, the man at the door takes your coin, gives you the disc. Number 11, you go upstairs. The room has the sounds it always has, the particular acoustic of people in various states of sleep, and you move to your bed, the one with the water stain on the ceiling above it. You've started to think of as a landmark, a marker of this specific place in the world you currently occupy, and you take off your coat and your boots and you lie down. The ceiling is white plaster. The water stain is there. You're warm enough, tired enough, here enough. Outside, Whitechapel Road continues to be Whitechapel Road in December. The noise of it, the particular noise of this street in this decade, the traffic and the voices and the gas lamps burning, and somewhere the sound of a church bell. Not the famous bells of anywhere, just a local bell, marking an hour for the neighbourhood it belongs to. Tomorrow Patterson, the building site on Commercial Road. The mortar and the brick and the specific weight of work that leaves you tired in the right way, the way that earns things. Tomorrow the arithmetic might be different. The accumulation might be real. January, a room, a key. You close your eyes. The city breathes around you. The city that is enormous and indifferent and full of people sleeping on ropes, and people sleeping in mansions, and people sleeping in doorways, and 5 million other configurations between them, all of them inside the same geography, all of them in the same November and December and the January coming. The sounds in the room settle. Someone coughs and then doesn't. The stove clicks in the corner as it cools. Far away, a horse on the road. The particular quiet that comes when exhaustion finally overtakes everything else. When the body decides that the emergency is over for tonight. That what is needed now is not vigilance but rest. Not preparation but letting go. Not the calculation of tomorrow but the simple absence of today. You let it come. This is how it feels when everything has been stripped back to the essentials of a life, when what you have is what you have, and what you have is enough to be going on with. Barely enough, just barely, but enough. Warm enough, fed enough, here enough. The canvas gives slightly under you. The blanket does its limited work. The ceiling, in the absence of light, is just darkness. The city is still going. It always is. The men at the rope tonight, the men at the sit-up, the men in doorways and under arches, the constable on his rounds, the baker starting the night's bread, the night soil men with their carts moving through the streets before dawn to take away what the city produces in darkness. All of it continuing. All of it the same as last night and the night before and the night stretching back to before you were here to see it, to before Thomas Hewitt was a clerk, to before the factories that closed, to before the empire that built the docks and the warehouses and the bridges. The rope has been there longer than you know, not this rope, not McCarthy's on Dorset Street specifically, but the principle of it. The person with too little, the penny, the night, the minimum configuration of surviving until morning. This has been here as long as cities have been here. The gap between what a city requires and what it provides, the people who fall into that gap and find whatever the gap offers them. They called it different things at different times. But the rope is the rope is the rope. And the morning when it drops is always the same morning. And the sound of 20 bodies falling forward is always that sound. You think about the man in the doorway on the south side of the bridge, the 2 pennies. You hope he found them. You hope the morning comes for him the same way it will come for you. The bell, the canvas, the world continuing, the possibility of another day. You hope. Sleep comes now. Not the reluctant, interrupted sleep of the rope. Real sleep. The sleep of horizontal, of being in the configuration your body was designed for. The long, slow drop into the particular darkness that restores things. The city's sounds become the city's sounds at distance, as if someone has turned a dial slowly, incrementally, until they are background texture, the hum of the place you're in rather than the immediate facts of it. The water stain on the ceiling is invisible now. Everything is invisible now. Just the dark, just this. Just the particular mercy of a body finally at rest after a day that asked a great deal of it. The church bell somewhere marks an hour. Centuries from now, this street will be different. These buildings will be gone. The particular configuration of Whitechapel Road in December of 1888 will be invisible under what comes after it. The rope will be gone, the penny sit-up, the terms for these things. The people who needed these things will be gone, long gone, their names mostly unrecorded, their stories mostly untold. But the city will still be here. Cities are long. Cities outlast almost everything. And in whatever city this becomes, in whatever form, there will still be the arithmetic of not enough. There will still be people calculating what tonight costs and whether tonight is possible. There will still be the question of the rope or the street, the bed or the bench, the warmth or the cold. Some things are very old, some things change slowly. But right now, tonight, in this canvas bed in the army shelter on Whitechapel Road, the question is not a historical one. It is the question of a body that is warm enough and tired enough and here enough. The question is only rest. The answer is yes. Let sleep come. Let the city's sounds become the river's sounds, and the river's sounds become the sound of wind, and the wind become nothing particular, just the movement of air in a quiet room, just the breath of people resting around you, just the ambient sound of being somewhere and being safe for tonight, just for tonight, which is all tonight needs to be. Let the rope be gone. Let the morning come later. Let your body remember what rest is. You have earned this. Take it. Everywhere in the city, people are finding their sleep. In the mansions and the terraced houses and the common lodging houses and the fourpenny doss and the rope and the doorways and the arches, in every configuration of warmth and cold, every configuration of enough and not enough, everyone is trying to sleep. The night holds all of it, and tomorrow the city will be exactly what it is again. The rope and the street and the soup kitchen and the building site on Commercial Road, and Patterson with his steady work and the slow accumulation of pennies toward the room with the key. Tomorrow. But that's tomorrow. Right now there's only this. The slow release, the dark, the rest. Good night.